Today we sit down with Rob Mason, AFL Coach Development Manager, to talk about feedback, how it's used within the AFL context and how it can be used within your environment each and every day. Rob, tell us about your background and how you got to do what you do today.
Yeah, I had a bit of it wasn't a straight line, my career trajectory. It's been a process over a number of years. I didn't know what I wanted to do out of high school, so sort of went and did a double degree in arts and music, as you do. Played the saxophone at uni for 4 years, which is pretty pretty textbook for someone who's in my industry now. I studied psychology for 4 years. Really enjoyed learning about how people work, how people communicate, how groups of people work together, and how people learn, I guess, as well. So, yeah, went on and did some more study at uni, worked in research for a little while, collecting some data in schools. Really enjoyed being in schools, so I thought, hey, maybe I'll become a teacher. At this point, my parents are going, "Oh, this guy's like a career procrastinator. He's going to be at school forever. You know, the bank of mum and dad isn't going to last for the next 40 years." So, yeah, did a teaching degree. Towards the end of that, I had to do a short research project, and that was looking at how sport coaches use teaching strategies. I was coaching at a local basketball club at the time. Unfortunately, not coaching the great Josh Hubbard, but you know, there's a lot of synergies between what classroom teachers do and what sport coaches do. So I did this short research project and got convinced to stay at uni to expand that into a PhD. At this point, mum and dad are really stressing that I'm never going to get a real job. But I spent 3 years, doing this PhD, looking at how coaches give feedback, how athletes receive feedback, and was really fortunate to be in the right place at the right time, and ended up getting some work through Port Adelaide Football Club. You know, I was living in Melbourne at the time, commuting backwards and forwards, getting Dropbox videos of the coaches teaching and looking at how they gave feedback, and that's where it all started. And so I'm now, coach development manager at Port Adelaide, and that was born out of doing a PhD plus getting some work experience at the same time, which I was really grateful for that opportunity, and that's the rest is history, as they say.
So Rob, tell us a bit about your current role and what does your usual week look like?
Yeah, so my current role, my job title is coach development manager. I actually didn't know what a coach developer was when I first started doing the role. I was kind of coming across from a uni background, with a textbook under my arm going, hey, here's what we do in classrooms and here's what we do at university. It wasn't really until I met some people in South Australia who are practicing in the coach development space that I realised I'm a coach developer. So what that entails essentially is helping our coaches to get better at what they do in whatever format that takes. So our coaches spend a lot of time teaching. So they're in front of a classroom, if you like, full of athletes, and they're learning about game plans and strategies and all these sorts of things. So I'm giving them feedback on how they're teaching and communicating to the athletes. They also do a lot of teaching on the grass. So during training sessions, they're giving feedback, they're instructing, they're helping guide the players' reflections on how each drill went. And so I'm there with a little Bluetooth mic and an iPhone, filming them sometimes and giving them feedback on how that's going. And then I guess my specialty over the years has become game day feedback. So I sit in the coach's box, I've sat on the bench as well, listening to how communication happens in that kind of high pressure environment. Once the siren goes and the ball's bounced, things change and feedback feels very different to how it felt in the lower stakes setting of the classroom during the week. So I'm there to record the feedback that's given, listen to the interactions between players and coaches. So that's another setting in which I'm giving, making observations and giving feedback to our coaches. And then outside of that, helping them with their professional development, whether that's in-house, running workshops on teaching and learning strategies, or how we support our athletes, with mental skills, these types of things. We'll pull in external experts to do that as well, whether they're, local to SA, or we've done a couple of Zooms with, US organisations and hearing from their coaches as well. So, however we can make our coaches better, that's essentially the umbrella that I operate under. So it's good fun. And there's no typical week, I think. They're all very different. We have a lot of variety in terms of being away, playing in Melbourne or Sydney or wherever we might be. We have short weeks and long weeks. We might have a 5-day break between a Sunday game and a Friday game. We might have an 8-day break where there's a little bit more breathing room. But I'm around the place, travel with the team, there for the coaches whenever they need me, and jump in with the players as well. And one of my big growth areas has been my drop punt. So trying to get a little bit better at kicking the ball back out to the guys after training, it's a long-term project. But, I often get the criticism that I'm meant to know a lot about learning, so why can't I teach myself how to kick? So, that's an ongoing project.
And Rob, what is your definition of feedback, and how do you explain what it is and how it works?
Yeah, it's a rabbit hole. Feedback, people can sometimes think of as just, in a corporate setting or in a business setting, it might be sit down with HR or sit down with your boss and have that performance review, and that's what feedback is. But I think feedback's everywhere all the time. Whether that's, in a footy setting, the crowd is a great source of feedback as to how you're going. Like whether they're cheering or booing for you, that gives you a fair indication. That's a source of feedback. So is the scoreboard. At training, we like to design games and drills where the feedback is inherent in the drill. You know whether you've been successful or not by whether you've moved the ball from one side to the other, as an example. So feedback isn't always a really formal sit-down setting. In a way, if we want to define feedback, a good working definition, I think, is that it's information that helps you to get from where you are now to where you want to get to. So sometimes you need feedback around where you are now so that you can, have that starting point for the goal. And you also need some really clear ideas around what the goal is. So that might be where you're chatting with a mentor, a coach, someone who has been there and has been to the goal that you're looking to get to. And, there are various ways of filling that gap between current and goal. But yeah, that's a way of thinking around what feedback might actually be.
So, Rob, how do you go about giving feedback and coaching people who are potentially not experts in your sport or within your space?
Yeah, great question. I had to kind of learn the hard way. I went into a professional football club as a 26, 27-year-old, having not played the game at all, other than, a year of grade 6 down at Bowen Road Primary School in Hobart. I was a raking long kick from fullback till I realised the ground was only 120 metres long. I think it's quite difficult to give feedback to someone, particularly where there's a power imbalance. And I've lived that personally, trying to give feedback to a Brownlow medalist or a premiership player who's now become a coach, and footy's their domain. It's their thing. That's what they've been good at their entire lives. And for me to come in as a 26, 27-year-old Ph.D. student who doesn't really know the environment, it's quite difficult to come straight in and go, hey, mate, you're doing this wrong. Like, let's try something different. I think I've been lucky to have a really good boss who's understood the importance of building relationships before the feedback piece happens. So, my first 6 months in the job, having coffees with people, getting to know them, learning about their families, learning about what makes them tick outside of their job. And then the feedback conversation can come a lot more easily once you've put the person first, I think. I think that's where a lot of people might come unstuck, is that, the feedback comes first before the understanding and the rapport and the connection and trust is really there. They come in thinking, particularly in football, you can give hard-hitting feedback and you can be, straight down the line, and that's just the way we do it because it's footy. But it's no different to any other workplace. You need to have that trust, I think, there first. And I think another part of it is having some runs on the board in terms of credibility, which, took me some time coming in without the footy background. But there's some research on teachers in the classroom, and one of the big predictors of student outcomes is actually teacher credibility. So do the students think the teacher knows what they're on about? We've probably all got examples thinking of teachers who are teaching outside their subject area. You've got a PE teacher who's got to double up in maths, and suddenly you're like, is this person, they're not talking like the other maths teachers. So it's around shared language, getting easy runs on the board, finding ways to show the person that you're giving feedback to that you've got some credibility in the space. And I think that's where your words carry a little bit more weight. But yeah, it's a long-term prospect. It's not something you can just create overnight, I think.
Rob, how do you develop feedback in partnership when working with people?
I think it's so important that feedback isn't a one-way conversation, and that it is, as you say, in partnership with them. I think, coming in as the expert over the top of someone to deliver feedback, sometimes that can be seen as your role, particularly if you're in a managerial position, or, you're working with someone and there is that power imbalance, you're working above them. It's kind of like this notion that you've got to come in, deliver the feedback and get out. But I think something that's really powerful and increasingly acknowledged as being, an important part of managing people is that feedback conversation. It's a two-way dialogue. You're not just, providing feedback to this passive receptacle who will listen to the feedback and take it off into the wide world and act on it. It's more around, having an interaction with someone in a way where you're able to help them self-identify some things that they need to work on. So you might ask some really great questions to them, just open up a conversation where they're able to self-reflect on their performance as well as, take some input from you at times. So I think the best providers of feedback are skilled facilitators who can create an environment where it's open, welcoming, like it's a shared environment where you can, bounce ideas back and forth and come to a conclusion together rather than having something that's just kind of delivered and then maybe clumsily left. And then, 6 months later you're going, I gave that person the feedback. Why didn't they listen to me? Well, it's actually not just about listening. It's about that two-way dialogue. And the more we can open up that partnership, I think the more effective the feedback will be in the long term.
So, Rob, do you have any examples of how you tailor communication or feedback to different individuals?
Yeah, for sure. Everyone's different. We know this to be true. Like how I might speak with, my mates will be different to how I speak to my parents. This happens all the time in all formats, whether it's footy or corporate or, your home life. Giving feedback's no different. In a football club, we have 45 or so players. And to think that they all want feedback in the same way is a bit silly. I reckon going back to the 90s, if you watch some classic sprays of footy coaches at halftime, feedback's delivered one way and one way only. There are no individual conversations happening. But in 2025, we've got 3 assistant coaches and a senior coach who are going around, in each quarter break, talking to different groups of players and then pulling individuals aside as well. And you can see firsthand you call it differentiation in the classroom, like the way that you tailor your individual approach to each learner. So, for example, we've got players who want to see the positive stuff a lot. So in their post-game review, they sit down with a laptop and some game footage. They just want to see the times where they nailed a kick or, did a really good tackle. They just want to feel good, feel confident going into the next game. You've got other players who, paralysis by analysis. They want to see every time they touch the ball, good, bad, ugly. They want to know what they've got to do differently. They can be sitting down with a coach for like 30, 40 minutes. But the power in that is that we allow the players to guide that and say, hey, I want to see the warts and all version, or just show me a couple of good things this week. And we've got coaches who are really responsive to the individual's needs. And so you think of yourself, again, less as just the provider of feedback and more as you're almost like a waiter in a restaurant and you're asking like, there's a really cool metaphor that a colleague of mine in the UK uses. It's like the Nando's approach to giving feedback. Do you want lemon and herb today? Do you want hot and spicy? Do you want somewhere in the middle? Some players might want, just the good stuff, the lemon and herb. It's pretty feel good. Some people want the spicy stuff. They want to know, like, right between the eyes, here's how you did. Here's how you need to get better. So the good coaches are using the Nando's approach, I think, and putting the ball in the player's court, to use a really poor sporting metaphor, and allowing them to be active agents in their own learning design in a way. Equally, you've got players who want to see heaps, players who want to see not much at all. There's all these different levers and dials that you can pull to make the feedback more specific to the individual. And, whether you're in sport or in the corporate setting, I think having that mind frame of being almost like a researcher or a scientist, an experimenter who will, tailor the types of feedback with input from the person. I think that's a really cool approach to take and would be in keeping with modern best practice, I guess.
Rob, how often should feedback be given?
Again, it depends on the individual. I think sometimes if you're in a position where it's part of your job, you feel the need to give more to justify that that's your job title in a way. You've got to be out there on the floor giving feedback all the time because it's part of what I do. But again, flip that philosophy to what does the person need in the moment. You can overload people with feedback. You see it all the time. Like if you go to, like there are some fantastic coaches, rolling around in junior sport, but you also see the coaches who are like, I'm going to be up on the sideline. I'm going to be screaming at these players and telling them exactly what to do. It's unfair on junior sport. You see that at AFL level as well. You see it all across the world. You see coaches up on the touchline giving more and more and more feedback. And it's almost like in their heads, they've got this PlayStation controller and they can say, go up, and the player will go up. But actually, what's going on for that player in that moment? Like they're watching where the ball is, where their opponent is. They're watching where their teammates are. They've probably got some people screaming at them over the sideline, in terms of spectators. And then to have a coach there as well, giving feedback in that moment while the performance is happening, that can be overwhelming. So thinking through what that person needs in that moment. Hey, maybe they do need a short, sharp cue, 1 or 2 words. Great. Maybe they don't. Maybe that's too much. And so I'd encourage people to think through what it means to give feedback in those, particularly in those high pressure moments or while performance is happening. I think it's slightly different to talk about an after action review, the stuff that happens post performance. You've got the luxury of time then, so you can maybe tailor your messaging a little bit more based on what the person needs. But again, if you're sitting down and giving someone feedback, don't overload them. Don't give them too much. There's this great phrase, I think we borrowed it from Doug Lemov, who's an educator and coaching practitioner. And he talks around, if you try to catch 7 rabbits, you'll catch none. And so just chase 1 rabbit, for goodness sake. Like, go after 1 or 2 things rather than overloading. In terms of frequency, again, some people, have a once a year performance review. Maybe that's not quite enough. Of course, there are probably more informal opportunities to receive feedback across the course of the year. I think it's just important to have, a feedback culture where it's okay to go and ask for feedback, and it's not seen as like something that you shouldn't do. It's not a, something that's off limits or taboo. Like, it's actually cool. Like, if you want to get some feedback, go and talk through it and let's open up that dialogue. But I wouldn't be, forcing it upon someone every week if that's just what you assume your role to be. I think critically through what the person needs in any given moment, I reckon.
So, Rob, often people find it difficult in a corporate environment to provide constructive feedback. Do you have any practical tips, tricks, or takeaways that you can share?
Yeah, I've lived this coming from a university environment where you have to be quite gentle and quite subtle sometimes in your approach to giving feedback, to a professional sporting organisation where the coaches there have been, players for 10 to 15 years. They've been used to getting feedback right between the eyes. It's just part of the culture and part of what you do. So for me to come in quite gently, not wanting to tread on any toes, go, oh, I'm so sorry, but have you considered this way? They're like, mate, just tell me, just give me the feedback. And so the constructive feedback thing was something that I didn't do particularly naturally. And I know it doesn't come naturally to a lot of people, but I think it comes back to a couple of key foundations. And the first is around, again, I sound like a broken record, but it's the trust and relationship thing. If you know them and how they tick, you might be assuming going into that situation, oh, this person really doesn't want to get feedback. You might project your feelings around what, critical feedback might be onto them. They might actually be totally fine with it. So the first thing would be like asking them, hey, are you ready for some feedback at the moment? Like, can we sit down and have this conversation? Is now a good time? Often the critical feedback thing is something that comes at a time that might be difficult for that person. If you're talking around, particularly around performance expectations in the workplace, the thing to do first is seek to understand what's going on for that person. And if they're having a rough week, that might be, explanation 101 for why they're not performing, and actually diving into that in a really curious way and caring about the person before you care about the performance. That might be a good starting point rather than just going in like straight for the throat, if you like. Again, you've got to know the person. You've got to know sometimes you do need to tread a little more carefully and give them a little bit of a sugar hit as well. There's this notion of the feedback sandwich, also colloquially called the shit sandwich. I think, is it okay to put that on the pod? We might have to just redact that word. But there's some really interesting evidence around the feedback sandwich in that it can negate the power of the critical or constructive feedback. If you're priming someone with some positive feedback, they're going, awesome, I'm doing a good job. Then you're giving the constructive stuff in the middle, the meat in the sandwich, and then suddenly you're giving more positive feedback. Hey, this is also going really well. That can dilute the power of the stuff in the middle, because sometimes people just want to hear the positive stuff around the outside. So I think if you are delivering that critical constructive feedback, don't feel like you have to, sprinkle too much sugar around the edges. Like, sometimes it's a matter of balancing it in a way where they're able to hear the most important stuff. And the last one I think would be to take the person out of it wherever possible. There are some feedback models and frameworks that talk around the focus of the feedback and whether that's on the individual, like, I really dislike you. That's quite harsh feedback to take, right? Take the person out of that equation and talk about the task that they're performing. I thought that, when you produce this report, there are a couple of things that I'd like you to tailor next time, or here's some stuff that I want you to work on. Suddenly it's not you're incompetent. It's not you're a terrible person or a terrible employee. It's here's the task and here's some feedback on the task specifically. So if you can shift that focus, often that will also make that conversation a little easier, and it will mean that the relationship is preserved as well, right? Like you're not going in, having a personal attack on someone and then retreating out of there. So yeah, keep the focus on the task. Don't sugarcoat too much, because I don't think that helps in terms of feedback effectiveness, and just, consider the person and where they're at before the feedback happens.
So, Rob, is there anyone in the public eye that you think, is a good example of how feedback's given well or not given well? That, coaches, business people, etc.
Yeah, for sure. I really encourage the coaches that I work with, and whenever I deliver a workshop, a really cool thing to do for the people in the room. I don't like the workshop to just finish and the learning ends, so I give them a homework task and I say go onto YouTube and just search for coaches mic'd up. There are thousands of clips of gymnastics coaches, soccer coaches, people coaching horse riders, for goodness sake, like all kinds of sports from all around the world, where you can listen to coaches interacting with athletes. And there's some awesome examples of what to do, equally some great examples of what not to do. But yeah, a really great, extensive free PD resource to go and reflect on how those coaches are coaching, and how the context might be similar or different to yours, and some gold nuggets that you can take from watching those coaches. The AFL put out a Sound the Alarm documentary in 2020 and 2021, where you can listen into the coaches in the prelim and the grand final. They've got the coaches box mic'd up, so you can hear Ken giving feedback during the prelim in 2020 against Richmond. You can hear Damien Hardwick doing the same in his coaches box. There's really great access that a lot of professional sports now give in terms of coaches and players mic'd up. The Amazon All or Nothing documentary series are also a really great source of how the pros do it. I loved watching the Arsenal All or Nothing documentary and seeing Mikel Arteta. At one point he's got this team of professional footballers huddled around him, and he's got a light globe in the middle of the circle, and he's telling this story, this really elaborate metaphor around playing together. I can't remember exactly the detail of it now, but the idea is that he's telling a story through a theme and an analogy, and the feedback is so much richer because of the way that he's framed it, and it's not just this kind of dry one-to-one interaction, but it's a lot more kind of alive and human. But everyone's got memories of a coach or a teacher who's given great feedback, and probably coaches and teachers who haven't quite nailed it. Knowing that I'm in a room here with two quite good sports people in, a softballer in Liv and a basketballer and footy player in Josh, I'm curious to hear from you both. What were the traits of, the best feedback providers when you were playing?
It's a good question. I think I'd probably more think to the professional environment that jumps to mind straight away. I think the best feedback is feedback for me that's happened in the moment. Or it's happened, slightly following the moment, where someone's pulled you aside and used that feedback in a way that's given you something to take away from it. I think feedback without something to take away or move on from, it can kind of be flat and not give you anything to go with. I think some of the poorest, people I've sort of seen at it, or people that, could really work on it, are when you have those, 3-monthly or 6-monthly reviews, and you find something out you've never actually heard before. And that might be positive or negative, or constructive, I should say. But, I don't think those formal reviews are the time to find out new things. I think they're the time to formalise discussions that have happened throughout the year. So for me, that's probably, the couple of things that I'd say.
Lovely. The Josh Hubbard model of feedback is timely. You want to get it straight away or soon after. Transparent. You want to know about it rather than have it a secret. And tangible. You want an action off it.
Correct.
Triple T. We love those sort of models, right?
Excellent.
Yeah. How about you, Liv?
So I think for me as well, going back to one of the earlier points that you mentioned, Rob, around receiving positive feedback and taking that into what you do next, I really appreciate that as well, because it kind of gives you a bit of a perspective on how you've done and what you've worked on hard to kind of get there. So receiving that and then taking that with you throughout, I think, is a really good learning experience as well. So definitely agree with Josh as well. It's really important around timely feedback and getting that constructive feedback as well, because that also does help you grow. But I really also appreciate being acknowledged for what you have done well, because for me, that's a really good source of feedback.
Awesome. And have you ever had a conversation with your boss around how you like to receive feedback? I mean, we're talking around two,
my boss is
two
sitting
people
right
from
here, so-
the same company, right? Like the feedback culture of Elevate. Do you have conversations around how you like to receive feedback? Or is that something that you're open to, having team meetings and talking around how feedback happens at Elevate? What's the template?
I mean, we've definitely had conversations around how I like to receive feedback, and I know that how you prefer to receive feedback as well. So that definitely does help. We're trying to create at Elevate a culture of open feedback and making sure that we do tailor that to the individual. So understanding how they best receive it and how we can then therefore provide that feedback to them as well.
Sounds like a great place to work.
It is.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rob, for your time today. We really appreciate sharing your insights around giving and receiving feedback. If you would like to see more of our podcasts, please visit our website at elevatemc.com.au, or you can also check out our Spotify account.